Hola, hello, bienvenidas. Welcome to this, the first talk of a series of monthly talks that FutureCon is going to bring to you after this very successful first WorldCon that took place in September. My name is Gabriela Damián Miravete. I'm a speculative fiction writer from Mexico. And I'm going to share this beautiful space with very cool people, and I'm going to present them to you. Let's start with Alejandra Decurgez. She was born in Argentina. She has a degree in psychology, and she's a yoga instructor. She wrote the novels Limbo, Colores Verdaderos, and Mis Muertos Amarillos. Some of her short stories have been published by magazines such as Próxima, Axon, Skeinball, The Wax, Revista Miniatura, and Supersonic magazine. And her stories have been included in national and international anthologies such as Alucinadas 2, Pelos de Punta, White Star, and Breves de Amor. Breves de Amor. This bilingual thing will make me crazy. Her short screenplay, The Dive, was awarded an honorable mention in 2015 by the Phantasmagorical Film Festival of Kentucky and was runner-up in the Miami International Science Fiction Film Festival the same year. Her short screenplay, The Mantis, was runner-up in the same festivals during 2016. Let's present you Maria Haskins. She's a Swedish-Canadian writer and reviewer of speculative fiction. She grew up and debuted as a writer in Sweden, but currently lives just outside Vancouver, Canada, with a husband, 2 kids, several birds, a snake, and a very large black dog. Her work has appeared in Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Fireside, Shimmer, Cast of Wonders, Black Static, Interzone, and elsewhere. And the first of our Rodrigos here today, Rodrigo Bastidas, is from Pasto, Colombia. He is a PhD in literature by Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. He's editor-in-chief of Ediciones Vestigio, a Colombian publisher focused in science fiction, new weird, bizarre, and weird narratives, with whom he published more than 15 books. He was a professor at Universidad Nacional de Colombia, Universidad Pedagógica Nacional, and also has lectured with the Cátedra Carlos Fuentes de la UNAM in Mexico. In Editorial Planeta, Rodrigo has published the Colombian speculative fiction anthologies Relojes que no marcan la misma hora and Cronómetros para el fin de los tiempos. He's a columnist in various digital platforms, including Revista Al Afuera, and his past academic production includes theoretical and critical articles published in Spain, Argentina, Colombia, and Peru. Currently, he's a scholar in el Instituto Distrital para las Artes de Bogotá, and he develops a historiographical investigation about Colombian science fiction. Hola, Rodrigo. And the other
Hola.
Rodrigo.
Hola, thanks to you and all the people and to Fellini in there. Oh.
Hello. The other Rodrigo is Rodrigo Juri. He's a 48-years old author and retired high school biology teacher from Chile. His works have been published in Portals magazines and anthologies from Chile, Argentina, Spain, France, and in Clark's World magazine. An associate member of the impronounceable name of the Science Fiction Writers Association. He's one of America. He is one of the founders of ALCIF, the Chilean Speculative or Science Fiction Society. His last work, Notes in the Supply of the Raw Material in the Bodies Market, was published in the anthology Recognizing Fascism, World Weaver Press in 2020. Welcome, Rodrigo. And now Yasmin Silvia Portales-Machado is a journalist, web editor, literary critic, LGBTIQ activist, and fiction writer from Cuba. She has a creative writing diploma from the Literary Formation Center Onelio Jorge Cardoso and Bachelor's Arts in Theater Critic from the Cuban University of Arts, an MA in Spanish from the University of Oregon. And since 2018, she is a PhD student in Spanish and Portuguese and Gender and Sexuality Studies Cluster Fellow at Northwestern University. Her subjects of interests are Cuban science fiction literature, public policies and cultural practices, queer theory, Marxism, science fiction, cinema, and TV. And her research examines how the Spanish Caribbean science fiction literature depicts sexualities and families, focusing on Cuba. She has published essays and edited in volumes, a lot of, and her fiction work had appeared in Deuda Temporal, Antología de Narradoras Cubanas de Ciencia Ficción, Sombras Nada Más, 36 escritoras cubanas contra la violencia hacia la mujer, and Órbita Huracán, Cuentos Cubanos de Ciencia Ficción. So, welcome everybody. It's such a delight to be here with you to talk about this, this landscape, this new landscape of Pan-American science fiction, speculative fiction. I mean, we are very used to think of America in terms of the a very specific place, America as a synonym of the US. And of course, America is a very large continent that includes a lot of nations, a lot of cultures, a lot of linguistic diversity. And there's a lot of production of this kind of literature in these several regions and cultures and languages. So it's very interesting to try to knock off that notion of America as the United States and bring our audience to this configuration of America as a continent with islands, of course, that share a common past, a past of colonialism, a past of very rich ancient cultures, and a very, very vibrant present in terms of political and social issues, and in terms also of writing new kind of futures in the science fiction, speculative fiction world. So I wonder, as a first question, because America is so diverse and we are from very diverse places, what relationship, if there's any, do you perceive in the geography of your region and the speculative fiction traditionally or historically written on it? Is it all about the sea or the mountains, or does it ignore nature and concentrate in the urban landscape? Or is it not even local at all? Can you bring us this like panoramic view over the speculative fiction, the science fiction that is written in your specific regions? So I don't know if there's some brave person who wants to start, or should I pick one of you? Okay. Alejandra, could you start, please?
Yes, okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I think that in terms of Argentinians literature, there's a lot going on, and there has been a lot going on very differently, because there are many countries inside of Argentina, and that has always been the case. Only recently we have come to realize how diverse our own country is, and we still do not know some authors and some literature that is being written in very far away places of the country in relation to the city center. This knowledge of new authors, or even older authors, is being made possible by, of course, the internet, and by indie publishing houses, which are constantly searching for new voices and older voices as well, interesting voices, I would say, whether new or older. There are some current authors such as Claudia Aboaf and Cohen, who, for example, are very local in their literature. They speak about they write about the delta of the river, and all their speculative fiction revolves around that place. But that place is quite near the city of Buenos Aires. I suspect there are many other authors writing out there near the Andes or in Misiones, very near Brazil, or maybe in the south of the country that we do not know of. And there are also many authors who are writing from the city. That is mostly my case. The last things I've written have to do with my own neighborhood. Not only the city, but my own neighborhood, which is in the outskirts of Buenos Aires city. But anyway, it's like part of it. But there are other authors like that write about other planets, other realities, other countries as well. So it's very difficult to find a unifying factor or a thread, a common thread, because this is a very diverse country in itself, and we have lots of things for everybody. And the same author can be writing very different things, many different things, depending on what stories they are writing. Maybe, or most probably, you've heard or you have read Mariana Enríquez, and she rendered a very interesting story. You were talking about politics and geography, and in the last novel that she wrote, in Spanish, Nuestra parte de noche, de la noche, I don't know, it hasn't been translated yet, I believe. She works both things at the same time, the political history of our country, as well as different places of our country, such as Misiones, with its very, very peculiar landscape and weather, and also the city. But if we talk about our traditional speculative fiction writers, our founders, our fathers, like Borges and Bioy Casares, you can also find different things, because Borges had a whole lots of works and short stories devoted to the gauchos and fields and the open and outdoors, and then lots of things going on in the city, like the Aleph, for example, and Bioy Casares as well. So that is what I think is going on in Argentina. It has always been the same, luckily for us, and luckily we are coming to get to know lots of writers from very different perspectives and places in our own country, and that is very enriching, I believe.
Thank you, Alejandra.
Thank you.
You gave us a very wide landscape. It's such a marvelous thing to think about Borges that way, about being a writer of La Pampa, of that traditional landscape. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Who wants to step in? Or okay, you are shy. So Maria, please tell me.
Yeah, so I think just like Alejandra was saying, Canada is sort of the same. Like it's a big country, so I think there's various parts of that. Like there are some writers who, like Kelly Robson, Claire Humphrey, I'm thinking about in their novels and novellas that definitely feature like the urban landscape in both urban fantasy and science fiction. And I'm on the West Coast, so that's sort of where I tend to focus, I think. Like a lot of the stuff that I recognize when people are using the geography in their fiction is when they are writing about like the Pacific coast. And that is definitely happening. Like I think one of the best writers currently working in short fiction that uses geography and sort of the feel of British Columbia, of the Pacific coast, is Rebecca Campbell. She has written a lot of short stories that are sort of set on Vancouver Island and along the Pacific coast. So she really uses, I mean, I think when I read her work, I really feel how it captures the sense of the coast with the ocean and the forest. And I'm also thinking about writers like Premeh Mohammed, who is in Alberta, another Canadian writer. And she has such a great, like both science fiction and fantasy and horror stories that where you can feel that Canadian landscape beneath the surface, even if it is maybe not stated outright that it's about a specific Canadian place. So I think there are like, what I really like seeing is when Canadian writers use the Canadian locations. I know in Kelly Robson's, some of her work, she really features, like she brings you into it by featuring, rather than just some random North American place. She specifically describes the places and the cities and it's the same in a lot of the other work. Like just to use, what I find interesting actually is, as a Swedish Canadian, is that both Swedish and Canadian writers seem to do that, to use the natural landscape, like the wilderness, which is not really that much of an accurate description maybe, but as like a place of both, like what happens with it in the future. So in science fiction, how will that be used? How will it look? But also a lot of fantasy and horror where it's used as the place where you discover things about yourself and about the deeper history maybe of the landscape, and both for good and bad. So I think it's a really interesting thing, I think. And also I see a lot of work like by newer Canadian writers that uses the immigrant experience, like of coming to Canada, and how that experience of being in Canada and seeing it through sort of new eyes and experiencing the culture. I'm thinking about writers like Sena Ahmad, who had work published in both Uncanny Magazine and Lightspeed, and she is outstanding. And she uses that, like the coming, not so much about the specifically coming to Canada, but featuring people who are dealing with that. How do you perceive this new landscape, these new cities, this new culture when you're coming from the outside? So those are themes that I sort of see, both this sort of the nature, interpreting it as making it part of the story, and also that immigrant experience. I see a lot right now in Canadian speculative fiction, and I love it.
Yeah, sounds great, especially in this historical moment when we are suffering from climate change consequences. So it's so good to hear that wilderness has taken the fiction. Thank you, Maria. Yasmin, do you want to continue?
Yeah, sure. It's very interesting because when I hear Maria and Alejandra speak about the several countries inside the political space that we call Argentina or Canada, I can't stop thinking how significant different experiences for me to conceive the diversity in my country, in my home country. I mean, I'm aware that Cuba is a very diverse country, but not so much in geographical terms. Like I live now in the United States, and all the time people is saying, no, it's not, it's close, it's 10 hours away in car, and it's like 10 hours away in a car, in 10 hours you covered 3/4 of Cuba. It's like 20 hours is a very long and very bumpy trip from Havana to Santiago, and that's it. And pretty much you end up covering the whole island. So the point for us in geography is precisely what Dulce Maria Loinás, a great Cuban poet, said once, that la isla son los puertos, right? And in that poem, he make a point about how the island creature is singular precisely because it defines itself in relation to the sea. If I have to define one geographical feature that marks and connect pretty much all the science fiction and in a certain way all the fiction that Cuba produces, is the sea. It's not the sea, it's the water, okay? Because the water may take two more frequently forms, the sea and the hurricane. Those are like the two more recurrent elements where the water becomes a force of nature that defines, controls, challenges the circumstances that human beings try to create for themselves. Because we are an island, and we are not only an island. I mean, I have this theory that all islanders are kind of xenophobic by default, because we don't know that invention of borders. We do know where the land ends. We don't have those problems with Mexico and the United States, or, you know, the people in Peru and Bolivia and Ecuador trying to find out eventually where the country ended or not. No, all that is like, how many strange things happen in tierra firme. Like, good thing I'm free of that. I'm not free of that, but you know, you can imagine it. For islanders, the foreigners are all the people that come from the sea, and our people, in a general way, are all the people from the island. So that is the thing with the island. But in Cuba specifically, because we are regularly besieged by hurricanes, clones, huracanes, our relation with water and weather can become deeply violent and dangerous. So you can see it, for example, it's kind of like a cliche. Eric Mota production, The Universe Havana Underwater. It's literally that the climate change produces a hurricane that they named Florinda, and it sinks the whole city of Havana. And the political and economic aftermath destroys the nation. Cuba has a political entity and produces 3 nations inside the island, which is kind of one of the default nightmares of Cubans, to lose the national integrity. But even when you read something like Mayelich Gonzalez, Technological Nightmares, you can kind of perceive that the species, even when they don't mention the sea explicitly, are conceived as islands. People live in urban islands or farms or stuff like that. It's a recurrent practice that it may seem at first glance that is an influence of, this cliche of the house where everyone is and someone died and then you have to find the murder. But for us, it's treated as a metaphor, mostly as a metaphor of the island in different settings. Even when Joss writes space opera, he referred to the political spaces that people create in other planets, or has, how do you say? Well, in many cases we say island or ship or whatever, but mostly the Cubans that go to other places find a way to get lost, to get isolated, to find in a violent way later to the rest of the human explorers and being unable to understand them and that kind of stuff. So I would say, yeah, the water in the forms of the sea and the hurricane.
Thank you, Yasmin. That's so interesting. Thank you. Let's go with Rodrigo, the one who talks with cats. Rodrigo Bastidas.
First of all, thank you, Gabriela. First of all, sorry for my English. So many times ago, I don't practice my English, so maybe I say something wrong all the time. So sorry for now. But when I think about Colombia science fiction, there's and everything about the landscape and all. It's very strange because here in Colombia we have a war for 40 years. So in this conflict, all the writers think in terms of the city, in urban terms. So all the places that maybe, if I can say that Colombia is divided in several regions because we have jungle and we have the Caribbean and we have mountains. For example, in the place where I born, there's so many volcanoes. So there's a lot of things in the landscape of Colombia. So all these places are unknown places for science fiction because all these places was taken in the history, in the literature history of Colombia for my camera, were taken by chronicle, by people that write about the war, but try to be realistic more than science fiction. So for the science fiction, these places not exist at all. Were places that never in the jungle happened one thing in the science fiction until the conflict was finished, or at least what's from the paper with peace agreement or something like that that never works, but that's other thing. But the thing is, all this time in the science fiction, in the literary science fiction history of Colombia, all the places was only the cities and the principal cities of Colombia, like Bogota, like Medellin, like in maybe Cartagena or Barranquilla. And that was from the beginning of the modernity, from the beginning of the century. All these places have the technologies and how the technologies was adapted to all these cities. But now was the places of the jungle, of the sea, of the volcanoes, of all these places never was thinking about the science fiction. So all these books, there's no many books, but the books of science fiction, what's like Yasmin said in one place, was settled in sorry for the ambulance in here. It was settled in the cities or in other planets, like some forms of symbolism, some things. I don't know. But all the places was the city, the urban cities. And it's very strange because all the cities that happen in here in the Colombian science fiction, it's some kind of modification of the city. So for example, in some books, their cities call it Tabogo instead Bogota. So there's some kind of changes in the scene Tabogo or Bogotrax or something like that. Like some little change in the name, but always the cities. In the last 5 years, with the peace agreement in here in the country, there's some kind of rethinking about how landscapes and spaces works in science fiction in Colombia. So one example, for example, very, very, very important, is the book El Gusano, or The Worm, by Luis Carlos Barragán, a young writer in Colombia, that thinking about rethinking the war in Colombia in terms of science fiction. Because that's very strange, because all the time, all the war was written about the history, the chronicle, the realism, the, I don't know, the hyper-realism sometimes, no? So the war and el ejército, guerrilla, and the guerrilla, all the things. But for example, in that book, in The Worm, Luis Carlos rethink the war and think the guerrilla like some kind of revolutionary thing about the genes, about how we can make some kind of mix with the animals, for example, and how the mix with the animals in the jungle can be the seed of the revolution. So in that term, rethinking the conflict in terms of science fiction can make can bring another vision of the conflict in Colombia. And this is very interesting because there's a book that I read, but they're still not published because I read some books of Editorial Planeta and other things. But for example, a book that I read, think the zombie, but the zombie phenomena with all the people that was killed in all this war. So what I think is, I hope, it's my hope, it's not what's happened, is what I see that comes in the literature, is that maybe the science fiction that gives us the chance to rethink the history of Colombia and the history that was in the hand of the realistic literature, and rethinking this history that allow us to rethink also the landscape. For example, discover all the things that happens in that small towns that you can go or you can't allow to live in for the war. So maybe, I hope that happens in the next 3, 5, 4 years, that the science fiction rethink the work, rethink the landscape, and rethink the sea of how we saw our country. So I hope my English is not so bad, so I think you can understand me. But I know I don't know. Maybe is that what I see in literature, in science fiction in Colombia, and what I hope, I expect to happen in the next 5 years, maybe. I don't know if that works. Thanks, Gabriela, and thanks, Fellini.
It works perfectly, and our hopes are with science fiction. So, Rodrigo from Chile.
Hello. Okay, the first thing is it's clear to, I think that I must to give you a view about the geography of my country. My country is a long country that goes from latitudes near the equator to the polar circle almost. So we have a large diversity of landscapes. From the north, we have the desert. The central part is the fields and the countryside, and the south is first the forest, and after that the glacial and the ice. So at the same time, we have a different or a big diversity related to this geography. We have a large diversity of cultures. We have the native cultures, of course, of the north, Aymaras and Quechuas and that people. And in the southern part, we have the Mapuches. I must to say something about the Mapuches. You know that this was one of the few people in Latin America that successfully resisted the colonization. So the Spanish colonization, I mean. So they stand even now as a kind of, how can I say, they maintain, they keep the culture in a very strong way and in a conflict way in front of the aggressive westernization of all of our countries. So we have these native cultures that regretfully, at least we don't know how much narrative things they produced in the past. If they produce something, I'm sure of that. Most of that has been lost in the wars and in the conflict and the time. So, but also in the westernized side of the society, we have a large diversity. Also, the people on the north, the cities of the north are very different from the center and different from the south. So even in the westernized side of the society, we have this diversity. Traditional literature, of course, has been able to to show these cultures and this land. Authors like Baldomero Lillo, Alberto Velezgana, Oscar Castro in the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century, they produced traditional literature, and they show the land in a very close way. The stories are related to the land and the landscape. We have the poets also, Neruda, of course, in a way, Mistral and all the others, Garcia Huidobro and Pablo de Roca and all of them. They also has a strong relation with the land and the landscape. They want to show it, especially Neruda. He has a very, very explicit text about the landscape, about the scenario where he was. Regretfully, science fiction has not done that in the past. Our first authors were, of course, strongly influenced by this American and Anglo-American science fiction. So their landscapes were almost the United States landscapes, or even other countries, away countries. They love to go to weird countries, far away countries. I remember this paradigmatic science fiction novel in Chile, Los Altísimos, from Hugo Correa, and part of the action happens in Poland. I mean, Poland. I mean, well, it's fine. I mean, I have nothing against Poland, but it's weird from a Chilean novel to be settled there. Anyway, after that, in the 70s, the first part of the 60s, second part of the 60s and 70s, well, I think maybe science fiction would have started to look our own country, but it comes the dictatorship. So political issues become a more urgent thing. So the science fiction of the 70s and 80s and 90s were strongly, it was a new, mostly everything was urban science fiction with a strong political intention that in a way, landscape was just set. There was not a big relation with that. I understand that. I mean, there was other things to show, other things to express. But now, things time has passed, and now we have a healthy production of science fiction with a focus on our land, or our landscape, our cultures, and I'm happy for that. There are several writers in science fiction, especially in fantasy. Yeah? Fantasy, our fantasy writers are very interesting to show the land, the people in the land, and how they relate each other. And science fiction is a kind of behind them, but also doing the same. I could say, for example, Michel Dev or Martin Muñoz Kaiser or others that are very interested in the Mapuches, and you read their books and they have a lot of relation with the land in trying to understand the land from the point of view of the natives, not only from the point of view of the Western people. So I think it's starting to happen. Among many other, but among many other influences that our actual science fiction it has, yeah, but this thing is there among others.
Thank you, Rodrigo. I want to remember our audience that we have a Discord channel, and we are having fun there too. So go to our public channel of this talk, Panamericana is it called, and also in the chat of YouTube you can type your answers for our your questions for our panelists if you want to participate in this conversation. So Rodrigo finished with this this present landscape of speculative fiction written in Chile, and you all of you have mentioned one example or two, but I'm very curious to ask you, how is the relationship with science and technology from the science fiction and speculative fiction that is written today in your regions? And also, does it, do you perceive signs of that redefinition we were mentioning at the beginning of our talk? This redefinition or this attempt to think another kind of futures, not necessarily dystopian, not necessarily taken by the great corporations of the cyberpunk, for example. Do you detect these new narratives in your own regions and this relationship with science and technology? I would love to hear what you have to say about that. Alejandra?
All right. I think that in Argentina, there's the trend that is going on right now tends to go more in the line of horror and speculative fiction in terms of new weird. I'm not entirely sure that we are thinking so much about technology. There have been authors such as Samantha Schweblin, who I haven't mentioned before, who some years ago pointed out as to the dangers of agricultural problems and pesticides and the consequences of the use of pesticides, but not from an entirely scientific point of view, but from a different point of view, more connected to speculative fiction or horror, you would say, but a very special horror. I think that nowadays in Argentina, we are not so close to technology and science, but we are like more focused on new weird topics that allow us to see through the veils of reality and to go deeper into deeper layers of reality. I believe that we are still very much in touch with dystopian futures, as long as I can see or I can say, because as I was saying before, there are lots of authors that I am not aware of. But fortunately, with the help of internet and all this dystopian reality, I will be able to be more in touch with them. But as I was saying, Claudia Aboaf, who works not only as a writer, but also as she is very eco-conscious. She develops lots of her stories take place in the delta, in the river, and they like bring about the importance of the soil and the water. Again, as Yasmin was pointing out, I was thinking about this, the importance of water through the eyes of some of the authors, and as well, and Samantha Schweblin as well, because all the big problem in Distancia de Rescate, in her short novel, was brought about by the polluted water. So to sum up, I would say that there might be some authors still writing in the lines of more classical science fiction related to science, but the thing is that science is like one step ahead of us all the time. So it's only natural that we start thinking along other terms and start diverging, because science is so much more ahead of us. I mean, Elon Musk is implanting chips on animals. So what can we say about that? How much further can we go? Of course, there's there's no limit for our imagination. But I think in Argentina, at least, we are trying, some of us, and most of us are trying to go deeper instead of further. I hope I'm being clear enough.
Yeah, that's a great definition. Deeper, no, not forward. Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Alejandra. Maria?
Yeah, I think a bit like Alejandra was saying, like in Canada, there's a lot of horror. There's a lot of the cosmic horror thing happening, and a lot of science fiction as well. But a lot of the stuff is like fantasy, dark fantasy, urban fantasy. One writer that I can specifically think of that's been that had a really good, I think it's a novella. I had to actually look it up to check, but I think it's a novella. It's Kelly Robson's Gods, Monsters, and the Lucky Peach, which I read a couple of years ago, I think. And it deals with all of this, like both the future, where humanity is sort of like coming out of the ecological disasters and trying to fix the earth and make it better and more livable after hundreds of years of problems that we caused. And that science fiction story is really, that's one of the best stories I've read. It also involves time travel, because they also travel back into the past to sort of try to help change the future. And I mean, they travel back to Mesopotamia. So it's a quite intriguing book that both is set in a Canadian future where people are using technology to make the world better, and going back into the far distant past where they're in Mesopotamia and end up messing things up a bit, if I remember correctly. But I think there is definitely a lot of thought of technology, but what I see a lot of times is maybe not so much that hard science fiction. Like Kelly Robson's book, I think, is that is pretty much hard science fiction, though it's mixed with other things. But a lot of people using it in stories that deal with more like giving it a horror twist or giving it a dark fantasy twist, and sort of maybe merging a lot of genres, like merging the fantasy and science fiction and trying to move between those, and using technology more as a, well, not backdrop, but that it's not the point of the story, might not be the actual technological things. And I feel like there's also, just like in Kelly Robson's story, where people, when people write about the future in Canadian science fiction, I find that it's often to maybe not a clear dystopia, clear utopia, but like that struggle, how it would work, like how would you build it? How would you use the technology to maybe be able to make a better world? And that there is some of the, maybe not hope punk, but you know, like the more like an ecological perspective to a lot of the science fiction that is being written. And I think, like, I really want to recommend Kelly Robson's book because it's such a unique take on that. So, I mean, I think it's a mixed picture, but like Alejandra was saying, like, I think so many writers starting to mix things rather than do specifically science fiction, and blending and mixing genres to make something new.
That sounds so great. I want to read everything you mentioned. Thank you, Maria.
Everybody, what is the name of the book by Kelly Robson?
Let me see here. I've got to read it because I've actually had to look at it because it's Gods, Monsters, and the Lucky Peach, which the Lucky Peach part is the one I always forget. I always remember the first part of it, Gods, Monsters, but Gods, Monsters, and the Lucky Peach by Kelly Robson.
Thank you. Yasmin, tell us.
I get distracted by the Lucky Peach stuff. Is peach like a fruit? That sounds okay. That sounds very sexy. What can I say? Okay, we were thinking before the fruit and the Freud detour. It was the definition of the future. No, there is no future. I mean, from that point of view, it's almost, we could make like the absolutely absurd claim that all science fiction writers in Cuba read a lot of Edelman and Halberstam and decide that there is no future. So we are not writing about that. Cuban political history and singularity in Latin America and in the Western Hemisphere actually produced a distortion in the discursive production of our reality. For many years, we were told that we were living in the future already. And that was one of the reasons why science fiction was not useful or productive, except to read Soviet science fiction, because it was pointless to speculate about the future when we were already on it, which is kind of, unfair to the people who are living their life and giving up everything for communism. But anyway, the point here will be like, right now in the 21st century, I'm not aware of any writer of science fiction in Cuba who is writing about a far future that is significantly different from our political reality. What we do is, we are super in love with cyberpunk because this is a quote of another science fiction Cuban writer, Bruno Enríquez. We are a cyberpunk country. Like, we have normalized the idea of using metal trays, have TV antennas, and crude grease for making our hair, that kind of crazy stuff. I will claim that we are not a cyberpunk country. We are a society trained for the life after apocalypse. So what most of the science fiction writers do is to speculate how far you have to go to keep living in Cuba, reusing and modifying the new technologies that will keep arriving, right? Because the general idea usually is we are still isolated by the sea, the technologies keep arriving, but our unequal relation with the rest of the world economy is very difficult. So the only way of survival in an authoritarian state that use all the available technology to spy and control the minds and the bodies of their citizens is to twist that technology in benefit. You can see it for a handful of watts by Eric Mota, where the thing is that you are not rationating electricity anymore. No, we are rationating watts, how many watts you can use every night in your house. Or in Between Clones is the Game by Eric, I forget his surname. We have a bunch of Erics in Cuban science fiction right now. So, where the thing is that this is a guy who wrote clones, and that is with stolen technology, of course. So he satisfied dark sexual desires or necessity of free labor force. Even when we have a space opera that imagines that in the future we will conquer the stars, again, most of the time, Cuban citizens have a connection with Cuba, the physical island, unheard, and or live in dystopic reproductions of the same military-oriented society that we have right now. This is something that could be read as a problem, because in theory, and most of the authors that think about the gender in our country claim that the point of science fiction is to think about the future and truth. But we are so worried about the short-term future of our country that we can only, what was just phrased? We keep conjuring nightmares in the hope that they won't happen. Like, this is our work now. We have to keep writing the worst case scenarios with the feeble hope, because we have a very strange not strange, a very singular relation with spirituality and divinity, with the hope that every worst case scenario that we invoke and describe in extreme detail won't happen. That's it. There is no future. We are hoping for it.
That's so interesting, Yasmin, because I think spirituality is a main theme in Latin American science fiction, new weird landscape, and it would be awesome if we dwell into that, but I don't think we have the time. So in another occasion, we'll do that. But for now, Rodrigo, Colombia, Rodrigo.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I was writing about the spirituality in here because there was an answer for that question, because I want to say three things about the question, but I don't want to say a lot of things. But the first thing about the redefinition of the future, there's very strange in here, because in here the political use the word future a lot of times to say their speeches. So, for example, the president we have now says in the speeches, like his logo was something like the future is from all of us. That was the logo from the speech in the presidential. But okay, when we think about that, the future is not from all of us. It's just from a little part of the government then use all the power to themselves. So in that time, I start thinking about we have to rethink the future, but not the future with the usual term or the usual concept of the future, but we have to rethink that word future, and thinking about the word future, we can make our future. So it's a very strange thing, because we all the time think that the future happened all the time, because we have all this timeline and say, okay, there's the past and the present and the future all the time that's happening. But no, the future, it's a concept, it's a cultural concept that we have created, and we have created in our literature and in our science fiction literature. So when we think about how we rethinking the future, we have rethinking not the future with all the tools we have to rethink it, the future about in the concept itself. So what happening here in Colombia with that idea is that was my idea. It's not of science fiction in Colombia. That was my idea. But when I think about the country, I said, okay, we have all this conflict, this war conflict in 40 years. So we, like, when we, like country signed a peace agreement, the first thing we have to make is rethink the future of Colombia, because all the future was thinking about the war, was in 10 years we have this war, or all the drug dealers war. That was another vector of all the history of Colombia. So we have to rethink in the future, but the future that was planned, but the political was the future like a logo, like a political logo and no more. So when we think about the future, the writers of science fiction start from that 0 point to rethinking what are we right now, and in that point we can think the future, only in that point. So in that place comes the spirituality, and there's a lot of books in the last 5 or 10 years in science fiction in Colombia that all the time was thinking about what we are in relation with our country, with the nature, with, I don't know, with the social, political, economical, ideological context. And like said Maria and Alejandra and Yasmin, it's in a certain way, the tool to rethinking us was the religion. But now the religion, the classical religion of Catholical, etc., etc. But for example, the another forms of conceive the human being, then can, for example, have a dialogue, a chat with the nature or with the cities, but the cities with like a human being first say something. Yeah? We can have these things. So books, this time in our little press, we have a book in the November that we're thinking about, for example, what it means to be Colombian from the Tibetan Buddhism, for example. And that other, but in Colombia, yeah, it's like a Buddhism, but in Colombia. So this another forms of thinking us is the way we can imagine a future that not be dystopic, because it sounds like a cliche, but we live in a dystopic, but really we live in a very close form here in Colombia, government very close to a dictatorship, very close. We're very close to a dictatorship. So we have to see ourselves from the spirituality and to rethinking a future that is not dystopic, and mostly community, thinking us like a community. This is very important for the science fiction here in Colombia. So we not are only humans alone. We are a community that thinking, that support us, and we can together think a future for our country. That is very important because we have to rethinking the history of Colombia like a community, because again, we was in war like 40 years, so we have to rethinking us like a possible community, and from that point, rethink the concept of the future. So that's just the three things that I want to say. Like, obviously, and just a very small thing, no more. Obviously, all these things have to see with another way to see the nature, also in here in Colombia, because all the things that happen right now with this government that is very close to dictatorship is all the great corporation, like you say, that all the that have all the golden and came here for the gold, for the water, for all things. So in sort way, the community is not only the community with others, is the community with the nature, that we have to rethink in that places that we can go before, because the war, but we said, okay, the war is over, we can go to see that places, and we go to that places and are full of machines that is distracting all the things in the nature. So it's okay, that was not the landscape I imagined before the war. So there's very complicated the question, but okay, I stop in this point. No more.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Rodrigo from Chile.
I will start saying that the relationship between my country and science is a very weird one. Well, as a Latin American country, of course, science is a kind of it's a product of the Western culture, but it is the last product to arrive to our countries. I mean, the science development is slow. Very few people is involved in that, and science as a didactic, as a pedagogic, as a way of thinking of people is scarce. I mean, we have a lot of problem with anti-vax, a lot of problem with, well, many other anti-science perceptions that grows easily when science is not present, or almost not non-present. But at the same time, as I said, that we have a special relation with science because Chile, well, first it was Darwin that stayed almost 2 years in our country in his trip around the world, And now we have the observatories in the north, these big, enormous observatories to see the stars, and they stay there in the middle of the landscape. And as a way of science is there, far away, is there, is not so far, but at the same time very far. I don't know if you understand that. Science stands as a light, a beacon there, but it's too far away from our reality. But it's there. It's easy to see the observatories and the NASA things and things like that. And so it's weird. Science in science fiction. Well, we started with hard science fiction. Well, tried some kind of hard science fiction in his works, but it's an exception. Most of our science fiction is socially related. Most of our authors are very interested to express their point of views on non-political, in the political conflict, in the political arena, and they use their literature for that, and it's okay, of course. Every creator has the right to do whatever they want with their creations. But the situation is that science is the poor brother of our science fiction. With two exceptions. Weirdly, we have the science has been taken by the conspirative literature. I mean, we have a very few authors writing a lot of conspiration literature, and they took science like a kind of a tool in their conspiration. And some of these stories are in the near future, are kind of science fiction, but science is taken from this other point of view, not like not this science fiction is not used even against Bacon idea of teach science, but on the contrary, science is kind of mythical thing almost. And the other section are the Uchronias, this alternative history things that used to happen in the Chilean literature, used to happen well at the end of the 19th century, or this Uchronias about Pinochet being a good guy. So, but in both of them, we have an interest of the authors to see what happened with science in that two scenarios. And that's they would like, it seems that they are interested to show how science would have been in these alternative histories. That's what I wanted to say about this topic.
Thank you, Rodrigo. We have a few interesting questions from our audience. So as we are, it's 12 already. Well, here in Mexico City, don't get scared. So I'll throw these questions at you, and please feel free to answer the one that you are attracted to the most. Paulo asks, we are talking about identity and belonging to somewhere, but in a global and dynamic world, what is the meaning of home? Home is where we live or where we feel at ease. That's powerful. Vitoria asks, how much you consider yourselves to be Americanas? Is it a comfortable term? Does this term embrace your origins, or is it still deeply connected with colonization? And Francesco Verso asks, are there publishing houses or small presses in your own country that translate science fiction from languages other than English or countries other than US or the UK? So Alejandra first with the question you want to answer, please.
Okay, I will take the one about home, which is something that I work on a lot in my own literature, and I try to criticize or put a question to that, to challenge that perception of home through most of my work. So I believe that home is where you are not subject to violence, for example, to begin with, where all your needs are catered for, not only the more physiological ones, but especially the ones which have to do with your autonomy, you being able to develop as a human being, to develop your own values, to feel valued. So I work a lot along those lines, where homes and families seem to be very normal, but deep down that is not the case. That's why I was telling you about authors like going deeper inside of further into the future, and you don't need to think in terms of global matters. You just need to focus on every community and every neighborhood and every house, and to challenge the definition of home, and rethink, as Rodrigo was saying, what home is for each of us. Of course, this situation this year has brought about changes that will stay with us for a long time. Most of them will be not so good. And we are already seeing those things, because communities are closing themselves, because people are afraid of getting in touch with other people. But at the same time, we have this kind of opportunities to meet people that I would never have met under other circumstances. So what is home, what are countries, what are communities, is still fortunately, those are concepts that are on the move and that are fluid and liquid, we could say, thanks to tools such as such as internet. My publisher, Laura Ponce, who is a very well-renowned writer and publisher, was talking the other day about hacking the system, this system that lots of times oppresses us. Well, we are hacking it right now to turn that system, this system, into something that brings us together and that feeds us both as human beings and as writers. So I hope I have answered more or less the question. For me, home is a very nuclear topic, of course, because of my own story. I have absolutely no doubt about that. I'm a psychologist, so but this is a topic that we should revisit in speculative fiction as much as we can. So, well, I hope I have been clear enough.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Alejandra. Maria?
Yeah, I was thinking about the question about American and how you feel about that label. And I think for a Canadian to be called American is very specifically, you feel like you're being called, you don't want to be called an American. Like, I mean, I moved here a long time ago now, but that was something it's been quite clear to me right from the start that if you're like for Canadians, it's very important to draw the line between when people say American, that they don't mean you. That's those other people that are doing crazy things on the other, especially more recently, like other side of the border. So I think that is an uncomfortable actually term for most Canadians to be called American. But I was also thinking about how that, like the identity question that I see raised a lot in by Canadian writers that I like and that I read a lot is the whole, like I mentioned this before too, the immigrant experience of people coming to Canada and trying to find the new identity and what it means to be, and also bringing other, like their past and their history into it and making that a part of a new identity here, and how that past, where you came from, where your family came from, sort of haunts a lot of the stories I find in a lot of Canadian speculative fiction, fantasy, and horror mostly. I'm thinking about stories like, there was a recent one by Susan Palumbo at Pseudopod that's called Tara's Mother's Skin, where a woman goes back to the Caribbean island that she came from, and she's studying it now as coming from the educated perspective, and ends up, of course, realizing that there are haunting things about that past that are maybe more real than she imagined. And also in, there's, again, Sana Ahmad's stories. She has one story in Lightspeed called Ahura Yazda, the Great Extraordinary, which also has this, like, a literal person coming from the Middle East, and like a magical being essentially bringing his magical menagerie to Canada. And like, how does it work? Like this, and this identity thing, and again, going back to home a little bit, like Alejandra was talking about, like how to create, to bring with you what you have and not lose it. Because I think a lot of the Canadian literature, speculative fiction, fantasy, horror especially, is concerned with that. The things that haunt you and bringing them to this new place, and they still haunt you, but they also interact with the new place in maybe uncomfortable and unexpected ways. So I think definitely not being called American, but also a lot of thinking about what it is to be in Canada, to be Canadian, with Canada's own past and history and colonial history haunting some of the stories, and the past that you bring with you when you come from another place and you bring it with you here. So I find a lot of, like, it's one of my favorite subjects actually, is this whole, what is the Canadian experience, but in a speculative fiction perspective.
Thank you, Maria. I feel seen, because sharing a border with the US is complicated. So we are the ones who are in that kind of situation. So I love what you say, and I feel a lot of things you expressed. So thank you. Rodrigo, you know who, yeah.
Okay, but first Yasmin was talking about, but I can speak, no matter. I'm gonna answer the small presses, the question about the small presses, because I have a small press that call it Vestigio. This is one of the books, for example, that call it Las Imitaciones, from the Uruguayan author Ramiro Sanchez. It's very strange, because the answer is related to the thing about the American, and I feel very Latin American. It's very strange, because all these things that Alejandra said, that we try to hack the system with all the Zoom meetings and all the things that we are with Laura and all the people. But there's a thing that we think in Vestigio, that we don't read a lot of resilient science fiction. So, for example, we're very interested about the Brazilian science fiction, and we found that some writers like Fabio Fernandes, for example, that we have in here, like we talk with him to make the translator of short story, or some authors like Antonio Cerceneschi, for example, that are very interesting, and we don't know it because we have this language thing, and we're very interested in that. So but also we have translated with the Portuguese we find another space of science fiction, and is the Portuguese science fiction. So we translated a short novel by João Ribeiro called Crazy Equates. And okay, not only English, also Portuguese, and we like to know another kind of science fiction, but we have the problem that we are a small press, and we make the translations. So we only know English and Portuguese and nothing more. So we have to, for example, the first time we read Fabio Fernandez was through English. We read Back to the USSR, but in English, but was written in Portuguese. So it's very strange because we don't have we don't know the languages like the Finnish, for example, and we was very close to translate a Finnish science fiction novel, but reading the English novel. So it's we try, but it's very difficult to translate another languages that isn't English and Portuguese. And I'm very happy to translate Portuguese because we can handle Brazil like part of Latin American science fiction and rethink Brazil like part of Latin American science fiction. That's all.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Rodrigo.
See, yeah, no, but sorry, Yasmin wasn't talking yet.
Oh yes, sorry. Yeah, what happened there?
I don't know. Just...
My phone rang, so that must be the.
What happened was that I was a victim of Aztec imperialism.
Obviously.
Yeah. Poor me, poor Caribbean Guild.
Sorry, my phone just rang like 11 times, and I was like, "What is this?" So I got distracted. Sorry. Yasmin, please do that.
So no, I mean whatever. The point of for me, the idea of the question of if I feel American is kind of this kind of absurd question that you do to start a fantastic short tale or a very perturbed essay, because as a Caribbean citizen, I cannot be any other thing than American. I mean, once I write, I was very pissed off with Hegel at that moment, that the Caribbean is truly the best modernity space because, you know, the Spaniards arrived and did this wonderful job doing ethnic cleaning and conquer, colonialize, kill, exploit. And so pretty much all the Cuban population, like most of the Caribbean island, it descended from immigrants, voluntary immigrants like Spaniards or some people from Sweden, by the way, or involuntary victims of human trafficking, like the people who was enslaved from Africa to Cuba, which I am a descendant from. So we cannot, and also because we achieved independence so late in the American history. It's funny because, you know, my Colombian friends, my Ecuadorian friends, my Mexican friends speak about the Republic in the 19th century, and I'm like, what? Who had Republic in 19th century? I didn't. My Republic born in 1902, you know? So basically we have a deeply rooted obsession with national unity, which had justified, you know, racism, all kind of erasure of diversity. But it's an idea that takes hold. We are not Africans in Cuba, we are Cubans. We are not Spaniards in Cuba, we are Cubans. We are not Chinese in Cuba, we are Cubans. Even when small population like the Chinese migrants retain their languages, or descendants of slaves retain their languages until the first half of the 20th century, the general idea was that we were, you know, first class or second class citizens, but still all citizens of the same country. And in that same logic, the idea of losing your identity in the name of globalization is kind of lacking of sense for us. I participate in a Telegram group chat about Cuba, and for me, from time to time, I go away again, and it's kind of disturbing. We live in the United States, in Austria, in Spain. I think 50% of the membership live abroad, but we're always discussing about, the prices of carrots in Cuban markets, like that kind of minutiae. So we, as a general rule, does not recognize, and that happened too with science fiction, does not recognize the idea of an identity lost to the logics of globalization. What happened most of the time is one of two things. Cuba remains like the center of the world because, of course, we are the best. The world has to, rotate around us. Or the Cuban characters experience a constant yearning for the loss of that homeland. Even when Cuba had disappeared because the planet disappeared, because the climate change happened and the Caribbean island disappeared, what you can see in those characters is the constant yearning, then the compulsive, unhealthy necessity of reproduce that anti-democratic society anywhere they arrive. So yeah, that's kind of it. We are Cubans, no matter what happens.
That's a good thing. Rodrigo, please.
Okay, thank you. I love the question about home, and I love the answer of Alejandra about that. I mean, home as a place where you're safe. I think that I believe home now, it has to relate with belonging and identity. Where I belong, where I share an identity with others. Interesting thing about these times is more and more we are aware of our roots, of our cultures, of our cultural home. I mean, for example, I am a son of East and West. My father's family is from Lebanon. My mother family is from Chile. I have traveled and lived in other countries, so I am a kind of alienated, I think. I don't care about much more about my geographical home. I care much more about my chosen home. And my chosen home is peace. I mean, I grow, I am happy with you people, my science fiction people. And I think I am happy here. So this is my home in a way. Of course, this is my house, and there is my wife, and this is my home also. But in terms of development, in terms of belonging and identity, I have chosen this home.
Yes, and I think in that way, yeah, we are each and all of us are right now at home, but in a double sense, right? We are in our houses, and also we are in this particular space where we are debating homely things for us and significant things for us as a community, as a global community. So that's
just to think, and the science fiction is also a home, because I think that science fiction is the third. I think it's the third, because we are here in our houses, in our home like the country, and our house like science fiction, like a kind of house. Because I found, like Alejandra said, like all these things about the pandemic, we talk about Latin American science fiction and all the authors of science fiction, and I think that science fiction it's become a kind of home.
Yeah, totally. And it's a home that is built by all of us. So that's the beautifulest thing of all. We ran out of time, and I didn't have space for asking each one of you about future projects and everything. So maybe we can use our Discord channel, our Discord public channel, to share our future publications, projects, and everything. We will continue that part of the conversation there, because we are just in time to finish this wonderful conversation. Thank you all for being part of this. I feel so at home with you, and so hopeful for the future of this, call it Avia Yala, call it America, but for this piece of land that we all share. So thank you so much, and we see you in Discord.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thanks.
Muchas gracias. Cuídense.
Gracias.
Thank you to all the people and the cats.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Cats, especially cats.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Ay.